All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Pathways to Informatics, where we interview various informatics professionals about their career journeys to give students an idea of all the pathways that are out there. I'm your host, Brian, and today's guest is Dr. Andrea Pitkus. I'm going to let Dr. Pitkus do a brief introduction of herself, and then we're going to jump right into the questions. So, Dr. Pitkus, you want to give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, Brian. I'm excited to share a little bit of my informatics educational journey and training. And I'm a trained medical laboratory scientist, and I have a PhD in health informatics. But I had over 15 years of clinical laboratory experience, and then decided to go back to school and focus on informatics. And I work on laboratory interoperability and usability and standards such as LINQ. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. You're doing all the things that I would love to do myself. So I'm very excited. Very different perspective than the typical things I talk about, which is in pharmacy. So um, before we start off with questions, just a bit of housekeeping. We do have a list of questions that we have compiled that we're going to go through and ask, but we do encourage audience participation. So if the audience has any questions, please leave them in the comments. And when we get a moment, we will go and answer those questions. So definitely don't be shy and ask questions. All right, let's start off with a icebreaker question. This would be a fun one. When was the first time you used a computer?
I'm going to date myself now. um, really, I would say grade school, we had Commodore PET computers. If anyone remembers those, they're kind of like a hard frame computer keyboard, pretty large in the classroom. And then when I was 13, I was excited I had a Commodore 128 computer. I wasn't as old as using punch cards, so we're not that ancient. But I was able to. We had a computer programming computer club after school and in grade school, so that was really cool. We had some teachers that would teach us programming basics. Probably the Hello World everyone remembers way back when. And then in high school, actually, there was actually programming basic language and a little spreadsheet and word processing courses I could take. And then in college, before I went to college, I did an internship in the College of Medicine in my hometown. And there was really some PhD level scientists, and they were like using Fortran and such, and Telnet and FTP, modeling how a carcinogen bound to DNA, which was kind of a fun summer project, and kind of learning some higher level things like about the internet and way back when. And then in college, I also discovered, in the computer lab, there's this thing called Gopher, which is kind of your pre-browser type setup, your and trying to use some of the telnet to kind of like communicate like messaging. If you think about what instant messenger and things are today, then when I went and did my clinicals at Duke, I was in that library computer lab, and there's a thing called Mosaic, which is like your first browser. So I'm really dating myself here. So. But yeah, you've seen how it's evolved, and now we have the internet today all over, right?
Yeah, there's just been a huge transformation in all of this tech, and I'm aware of some of those terms, and I've definitely looked at at them before. I think I started on the Windows 93 or 95 system is when I started, but I had floppy disks and all those kind of things, so it was fun.
Well, the large floppies or the smaller floppies?
The large ones. I had the large ones. People don't know what those are anymore. Yeah, long time
Just
ago.
like a dial phone.
Yeah, good memories though. Very good memories. It's amazing how much technology has advanced since then. But okay, let's jump into some of the questions. So the very first question here is, tell me about your reaction the first time you heard about informatics as a career path.
Well, honestly, I really didn't know it was a career path.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing my undergrad in medical technology, so I was focused on laboratory science. And I mean, we have lots of instruments and a lot of different platforms in the laboratory. And I was working in the laboratory, et cetera. And then I decided want to go back to grad school. So um, I was focused in my master's in clinical laboratory science at Minnesota. And interestingly, one of the first areas of healthcare to be digitized or use computer systems was the clinical laboratory back in the 60s, if you can believe it. And basically, So the health informatics program at Minnesota was actually housed under lab med and pathology. So when I was working my master's degree, there were these electives in health informatics. And I'm like, this sounds interesting. Took the classes, just fell in love with it. And I actually later switched into the PhD program after I had done most of my master's work. But yeah, I'm really grateful because having kind of conversations with some of the faculty as you're taking the courses and and the thing that really kind of dawned on me then is in the laboratory, we generate about 70% of the information, and anecdotally due to a Mayo study, is not empiric data, in the EHR. So what I had been doing as an undergrad and working in the clinical laboratory, analyzing specimens, generating all this data is really kind of the crux of informatics. We're developing or creating all this information and dealing with the challenges therein. And so that was just a really natural kind of transition, if you will, from going from the clinical lab into informatics.
Just a follow-up question on that too. And I'm always curious, those who get into informatics. So you were in clinical lab before you switched into your program. Have
Mhm.
you always had like an interest in technology, like tech stuff at all?
Kind of on the side, but
Uh,
interestingly too,
okay.
after taking programming classes, I knew I didn't want to be a programmer. For whatever reason, it just didn't appeal to
Okay.
me.
Okay.
So it was more you know, like when I was doing projects at Duke when I was in lab, I was learning about the lab information system, especially like what a super user might do behind the
Mhm.
scenes, from my dear friends who was there because she was kind of focused in that area, and then I was kind of cross teaching or collaborating in the sense of setting up spreadsheets for things like inventory of
Mm.
calibrations and things. I'll kind of my lab friends will probably laugh at me, but some of the things that you need, or we'd have paper-based processes in the lab for um, doing things like interface checks and things for CLIA, and it's in even ordering inventory, so you have exactly what you need for reagents and things. And I know it's pretty lab specific. A lot of the lab diagnostics business now have these tools for people in the laboratories. They've solved these problems or challenges, and so that's one thing. No matter what types of informatics interests you have, thinking about how can you use informatics as a tool to help make your life easier. That's one of the reasons I went into informatics,
Mhm.
and also solving the challenges and problems. Especially from either reducing workload, your clinical burden, patient safety issues. You want to make sure you have good data. So there's a variety of different things, and you see some of these problems when you're on the job too, right? Whether it's pharmacy, you're like, okay, I could do this differently, or how can I make this
Mhm.
better? And so informatics is one of the tools and means that you have to help with those challenges.
And I think that's another common theme that I see a lot in our informatics colleagues, where we're in practice somewhere somehow, and then we were like, we can do this better some way, and then we usually gravitate towards informatics. Okay, so your PhD training had a lot of things in there. That as I was looking through your history there, one of the things that was very intriguing was that you were also a fellow at the National Library of Medicine. Um, I'm just very curious because I've always thought about that program too. Can you tell me more about how did that happen and what was your experience like?
Sure. So the National Library of Medicine has training fellowships basically for informatics training, where if you have a clinical background, pretty much at least at the time I was there, I don't know if anything's changed on their criteria, but basically you can be eligible for like a pre-doctoral and postdoctoral fellowship training. So they also fund roughly not quite 20, I think, training sites across the country.
Mm,
And so I was fortunate in Minnesota. We were on a training grant at the time. So they had the funding basically for students there would have these fellowships. So the nice thing about it too that I liked is one of the challenges I had when I decided to quit my job and to go to grad school is like, how do you pay for your education? And I've been blessed that there've been opportunities with like teaching and research assistantships, and
mm,
then the fellowship to be able to do that so that I could focus on my education. I also worked on the side in as a temporary medical technologist in a health system so that I can keep my clinical skills up and
mhm,
really kind of identify some of those problems. But for the fellowship, One of the things that I really liked too was each summer there would be a gathering of all the funded students and faculty that usually alternated between the National Library of Medicine in Bethesda on the NIH campus or one of the training sites. So, there was usually selected students and faculty that give presentation about their research. So you can really learn a lot about what people are studying, like what are the current informatics problems, who's working on what. And then there's also time to have some site visits. So it was really cool. We had a tour of the National Library of Medicine, and you kind of hear this like icon in informatics, and really kind of seeing what it's all about, what they're doing, what they have, what research and programs they have. It was kind of fascinating. And then also there's opportunity to mingle with the students and faculty, and that was a really great opportunity. I mean, you're meeting people from all these different programs and kind of having the informal education or informal conversations with
Mhm.
people, kind of like this is providing, even though we're not able to meet in person. I see people are commenting about that. Is how do you interact with people and kind of bounce off ideas or just learn what people are studying, all the different clinical experiences, mostly a lot of doctors and nurses, but there's pharmacists and an occasional laboratory professional or pathologist. uh, you find out too, people are technical backgrounds or clinical backgrounds or both, because there's a nice melding. But the cool
Mhm.
thing too is, just seeing some of the people in person or meeting that you've studied about or heard about, some of the informatics pioneers. I mean, Donald A.B. Lindbergh, I remember him at one of the meeting him at one of the training sites, and Reed Gardner I also met through our I5E program with Utah, and Homer Warner as well. I mean, and then I've also unfortunately, some of them have passed on, but now others, like Clem McDonald, who's an icon. I work with him on Loink things too,
Mm.
on occasion in standards. So it's really kind of humbling and an honor, but a really good way to interact with people and learn from people too.
Yeah, the faculty at NLM has just been very impressive, and the fact that you were able to go there and meet some of these people, I imagine it was like a wonderful experience as you had described. So we have a couple of comments here that came in. It's not coming on a restream here, but that's actually Seth said that solving the problems of the challenges. Well said. Nicholas says the epitome of informatics, and then Nick also says I miss in-person gatherings. As do I. As do I. Okay, let's move on to another question here, which is another one of your unique experiences that I see in your history, and that is the program at you said IFE. I can't pronounce
High
I-
five. Yeah.
IFIE, so International Partnership in Health Informatics Education, and it sounds like it was an opportunity to kind of learn from a different part of the world. Can you share more about your experience there and what that was like?
Yeah, no, that's another wonderful program I was had a wonderful opportunity to present and participate in. So a number of the faculty from Europe and the US had basically wanted to get together an educational program and kind of exchange of ideas and such to make more of a global informatics education. So Minnesota, Washington, and Seattle, Utah, and then you have Amsterdam, Amsterdam Medical Center in Amsterdam, Heidelberg and Heilbronn in Germany, and then later UMIT, which is in Innsbruck, and now they also have university in Taiwan. So basically, they come together every summer, kind of like the NLM, and they have a master class, and they have select students from programs and faculty, and they kind of do um, a week where you're at one of the sites, and the students really come together and are put on teams where there's one student from each program, and they're tasked with kind of a problem solver, a project to do during the week. And sometimes it's looking at an international medical informatics or IMEA yearbook journal article and having some questions about the article and doing a presentation. But you get an opportunity to do that cross collaboration and learning again as a student. But you also have student presentations, you also get faculty presentations. So you get to learn from people not only from your own country, but other countries, and kind of understanding what's going on globally. And then there's also downtime where there's some fun activities like dinners and things where excuse me, that you have the opportunity to informally interact with faculty and students and such. So um, it's a really great opportunity and again, learning experience. And it really kind of set the bar because I was didn't know German language. I took Spanish in high school, and I was at one of the dinners, and I was asking, the faculty help me with the menus and things like that. So I was ordering, there's an informatics problem for you. Um, but just making the comment like it would be really cool to study here, and they're like, oh, do you want to be the first from Minnesota? And I'm like, sure, help me
Wow.
pay for it. um, like any student would say. But so I went back and I worked with one of the faculty in Europe to be able to study in Heidelberg in Germany. And interestingly, the tuition was like 50 euros for the semester. So really a bargain for
Wow.
at the university. I mean, you have other things like you have to make sure you have your own health insurance and you have to show funding and
Sure.
stuff and pay for your housing. But I was able to get into an international grad student housing, like apartment and things like that. So I had other like roommates that were from different countries. And it was just such a wonderful experience. I took a year German with the freshmen at Minnesota because, computers and science don't talk back and
Hmm.
translate, self-translate. So I want to know enough to be able to navigate. But it was huge opportunity learning more that I could imagine. I mean, yes, there's the informatics piece of it and learning from the students there. They would have the European schools a class project where they would have students from each program and they would be tasked in a group to learn about a specific information system in their clinical areas or in their country. So like a dental information system or a pathology or
Hmm.
pharmacy. And then they come together for a class where they would learn and share about them. And that was really, really fascinating because you're hearing from the differences and the similarities. And I'll say European healthcare, there's things that are different, like they don't have HIPAA there, but they have other security and privacy laws.
Hmm.
So if you think about informatics, I was able to get into their medical record system. Interesting to try to navigate that in German, working on case studies and such. But what I liked about it too is that they have a different payment system.
Hmm.
Their health, which if you think about it, our payment systems really dictate a lot of what we do. Like we have to bill for certain things, or how we can do things. Or insurance covers this or that, whether it's generic versus brand name medications, or you can't get a genomics test because it's a high cost. They have public and private insurance, and this actually came up on a LinkedIn post this morning where someone was commenting about some of the things in healthcare. Um, and so in Germany, with the public and the private insurance, it means that patient, if you're on private insurance, you might get the new drug or the new treatment that's more expensive. But on public insurance, you might get something that might be fairly similar in effectiveness, but may not be as expensive, or you might not be able to be eligible for that new treatment per se. And I'm kind of generalizing it from what folks were telling me. But the other thing too is their healthcare is different from um, in Germany. They have different clinic buildings, so it's not under the hospitals and all under one roof.
Hmm.
They're separate buildings, kind of either across town or within a couple blocks now of each other. Where you have the chirurgische clinic, which is for surgery and trauma. So you have this doctor called a note arts that follows the ambulance and decides, okay, the patient needs to go to this clinic or that clinic based on their needs. And there's like an ambulance bay, and there's the outpatient clinic area, and then there's assessments, and then that building usually has a wing of an inpatient area. So it's kind of, you also have your outpatient inpatient areas that are kind of connected, which was kind of interesting. And for medical informatics at the time, um, the department was housed in what they call the Kopf Clinic, which is everything to
Hmm.
do with the head. And they literally mean everything to do with the head. So you would have anything from neurology to dentistry to ear, nose, throat, otolaryngology, which I thought was kind of funny that, informatics was in the head clinic. But um, yeah, so that was kind of an interesting experience. While I was there, they moved their internal medicine and built a new building there, and they've moved things kind of on the campus a little bit closer. The surgery clinic moved closer next door to the internal medicine clinic. But there's a lot of differences, not only with the language and regionalization,
Hmm.
but just kind of how they do medicine. My area was hematopathology, or kind of with bone marrows. That was kind of my dissertation topic. And so they have the hematologist that goes and reads the bone marrows in the laboratory. So they don't really have a hematopathologist, which I thought was interesting too. So, it's not necessarily better or worse. It's just kind of a different approach to things. So,
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of intangibles that you've gained beyond just learning about informatics, just learning about an entire different health system in a different country, in a different part of the world. Um, makes me want to go abroad and stuff. I wish I'd studied abroad. I've never studied abroad. That's an awesome experience. And it looks like Nick has a related question, and I wonder if you know. I wonder if there are any similar meetings of the minds for all of the. Looks like that's cut off MSHI programs. Something I'll have to look into. Yeah, I'm kind of curious myself. Do you know if it's only unique, like this program, unique to those universities that you mentioned earlier, like Utah, Amsterdam, or is it?
yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, any university could have a study abroad, and a lot of people do that at the undergraduate level. And I'll say too, the European schools, a lot of their informatics students are like in undergrad levels. So Germany had a 5-year kind of undergrad diploma, they called it.
Mm,
They were switching when I was there to like more of a bachelor, master's type level. So certainly anyone can set up like internships, whether they're things like Brian, I think we're talking about the NLM and stuff. There's some, training programs. Folks interested in public health informatics, there's a lot of like fellowships and programs in the US, like the ORISE program,
mm,
ORISE. There's also, so really, I would, I don't, you have to do some research on things to find where these opportunities are. But I think too, there's more, there's the AMIA 10 by 10 training programs too, for folks, looking at different training paths. So there's a lot more training and opportunities in informatics. I may not know where they all are or anything like that, but certainly look into them. And if you don't see them, ask your faculty, ask your professors, because sometimes they can do individual agreements to make sure credits transfer, or just set up opportunities within their networks too.
yeah, maybe I'll go back to school to get that opportunity. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so let's move on to another question. It looks like some of these questions you may have answered already in your introduction about why you decide to pursue informatics, but maybe your specific area of informatics, and you've addressed it partially already. But if you want to elaborate on how did you decide on the specific informatics career that you're currently in right now?
Yeah, I would say, I when I went to go to grad school, I really wanted to improve kind of laboratory medicine and kind of help solve problems and
Mm,
such. And then, like I said, I kind of stumbled into informatics. And then when I was working on my PhD, I had to think of a research project, what informatics question in the laboratory area to address. And during my master's, I spent time diagnosing bone marrows for leukemias,
mm,
and sometimes confirming before bone marrow transplant, because Minnesota had a strong program there. And I kind of got the question of, do all the diagnoses that occur on a bone marrow that's collected and sent to 3 different labs, usually the microscopy for hematopathology, flow cytometry for cell markers, and then cytogenetics to see if there's any genetic aspects. Do they all come up with the same diagnosis or not? That was kind of my
mm.
question. And, can you build a decision support tool to kind of help alert people? Because sometimes these tests are done in different labs. They might be one done at a reference lab that's totally offsite from a facility if they're doing part of it on site. So I kind of focused on that, and then I was getting ready to graduate. I'm like, okay, looking at positions, and I thought I really was going to stay in the Twin Cities. I love living in Minneapolis, but
Mhm.
as I was looking, where are there informatics positions, and then the College of American Pathologists, which is the pathology professional organization, but they're also a creditor of laboratories. They were standing up a diagnostic intelligence and health IT department, which seems like it was great timing, great fit.
Yeah.
So I was there for the launch of that, and I worked on an area of electronic cancer checklists, taking the CAP cancer protocols utilized for the data elements for cancer reporting. When you think about that, going to ending up on when you hear yearly when the cancer rates are going up and down, I learned so much about the whole cancer registry community and cancer reporting between NIH, SEER programs, and CDC, NPCR, and I know I have a lot of acronyms, but basically cancer reporting by law, and I was working on that. And then this thing called meaningful use came out, and there was an opportunity there too. Do I want to continue in the cancer side, or do I want to go more in the clinical lab side? So I kind of transitioned. There's just an opportunity to present itself, and CAP was involved in a big grant from basically CDC, and then supported by ONC for electronic lab reporting to public health. So here you are at the cutting edge of, how do you do this? It's listed in the meaningful use regs. You're supposed to do it electronically, but yet there's still public health jurisdictions that accept paper-based reporting or faxes, as we've seen in the pandemic. So if you're a laboratory and you're reporting, how do you do this electronically? A lot of labs thought they were excluded from meaningful use because, frankly, it was for eligible providers and eligible hospitals. So labs weren't getting incentives. However, most hospital labs would be part of the eligible hospital reporting for those requirements. But then you have all the non-hospital labs, like your reference labs and such. So the grant tasked us with the hospital labs. So we went and helped over 1,200 hospital labs with setting up ELR. We did a lot of education on LOINC and SNOMED, and then pulled in the public health jurisdiction so they can meet and mingle and have peers again that were further along in the process, help those who are getting started. We had a ton of fun. It was a great opportunity. SureScripts was the lead on it. So your pharmacy colleagues will probably recognize SureScripts being in the pharmacy space. And then also the American Hospital Association. So we targeted labs from kind of bottom up from CAP, but American Hospital Association worked their hospital association. So it's kind of been evolving because the group I was with at CAP too also were the folks that created SNOMED CT. So being around some of those folks and learning from them. So I kind of transitioned and kind of been focusing on laboratory and terminology. And as you know, meaningful use is like, and now we're beyond that. We're in the promoting interoperability phase of things. So, I would say medicine, as you know, is never static. It's always evolving. So similarly, evolving from an informatics perspective. So I work a lot in terminology, and where I'm at now is I'm more out of the laboratory and out of the LOINC mapping kind of space per se. I'm on the lab LOINC committee, but working more on making lab data more usable for clinicians. So at Wisconsin, my boss is internal medicine physician, Dr. Buchanan. He's working on the problem-oriented view. So I'm working on the lab pieces and LOINC mappings. We have a pharmacist. But how do we generate that in the medical record to reduce the clinical burden and help clinicians? So I know it's kind of a longer answer, but I've taken quite a bit of journeys. Doors have been opened and closed, and you kind of go from there. I don't say that I have a specific end goal in mind because the problems are always changing. You're always having more informatics problems. And the other thing is, if I had like a specific goal in mind, because these new problems are coming up, or the informatics field is evolving, whether it's the regulatory policy standards, it just helps you be a little bit more agile and flexible to adapt to these changes.
I mean, that's personally for me, it's what keeps informatics interesting when it's changing so much. And to be honest, even looking through your career history, you seem to have like shifted into different areas of the industry itself, and you've seen a lot of different things. And I guess the experiences that you were describing just now apply primarily to CAP, your time at CAP with the consulting. And I'm guessing if we look at this from like a broad perspective, that was consulting, right? At that time, can you?
Yeah. So yeah, parts of it were kind of working on the grant, and then going into consulting, and then more grant work as well. So it was kind of a mix, but
Okay. Can you maybe from the consulting side tell me more about your experience in terms of positives and negatives? And in my mind, I'm thinking this: if I was a PhD student about to graduate, consulting seems to be one of those common routes. And so, is that the main pathway that you were hoping to take, or just because it just happenstance came about?
it was kind of happenstance in a way, because I was working more on the cancer reporting, which is like an internal project, and more of a product because I'm CAP licensed the electronic cancer checklist. But then with meaningful use, CAP also had a consulting side, so I got pulled in as a subject matter expert or SME on a lot of different engagements and things. I would say I never would have thought I was going to do consulting. I'm
Mm.
glad we had a seminar on that in grad school, so I kind of someone who had done consulting to know a little bit about it. It's like, okay. But it was a natural fit from your experience, like in the clinical lab, the workflows, kind of the data and the needs and such. And so going in that route, and then it was, a lot of the engagements were on encoding and mapping and related, but not exclusively. So that was, um, I liked working in it, and you had a cross-functional team. So you'd have like project managers, you have executive lead, depending on what areas of expertise you needed on your team. So that was a good opportunity there. A lot of cross-functional work. Um, the negatives, well, we had one coworker who had a unexpected injury in the
Mm.
middle of some deliverables. So it's like, okay, are we flexible to step up? Who can help, fill that person's shoes while they're out? We originally thought they're going to be out for 6 weeks and ended up being 3 months. And so,
Wow.
um, you know, I will say also with consulting, it depends on, there's a lot of different consulting engagements that occur. Some people go into consulting and they go from their home, they're on the road from like Sunday, Monday, and they come back Thursday night. They'd always say, Chicago here can be super busy on Thursday evenings because everyone's coming back into town and you're home office on Friday. Um, so for some people, that's really in a variety of fields too, not just informatics and healthcare. It's really engaging. You get a lot of experience helping customers on the site. Um, but some people, depending work-life balance, may not be for them, and depending where they are in their career stages too. So I'll put that out there too. I think we had a nice balance where we were with travel and kind of in the office and things like that. I enjoyed that. Sometimes the travel would be a negative too when you have these little
Hmm.
hiccups that occur, lost luggage, that sort of thing. So, um, um, those are probably. But like I said, it was a lot of fun when we were helping people and with the teams you're working with too.
Yeah. Great opportunity to meet a lot of different people and also like travel around. Okay, and you use the term cross-functional a lot, so this is probably a nice segue to the next question, which is, after you spent some time consulting at CAP, you switched into product management, which is actually something that a lot of my colleagues are talking about now, switching into, and it's a very much cross-functional role and different from consulting in some ways, but similar in many ways. And so, can you tell me more about why you decided to make that switch into product management versus maybe consider continuing down like the consulting route?
Yeah, it's pretty simple answer. There was restructuring that occurred.
Oh,
And
okay.
so that's something too that I've learned, on the business side to expect or encounter now. And I know some colleagues have encountered that too. Is so basically kept a said exit consulting, and they were like,
Mm,
so the division was closed down, and so it's like, where does everybody go? And we had different people in different various stages of their careers. So some people in different life situations with different people. So everyone had to kind of figure out what's next for them. It happened to Intelligent Medical Objects is a big terminology software company and a lot of EHRs, and they focus on the problem list, or well, I should say problem list management, the problems and the terminology. So they were working on expanding the lab area. So um, and literally it's just down the street, and so I figured that was a fit for
mm,
me. So I worked on a lot of their content and laboratory products. It was another great learning opportunity to working with a variety of people. What's interesting is like consulting versus product management is um, thinking about it. Consulting, you're usually billed by the hour for your clients, and so there's a lot of really like people resources and time and expertise. Product, the sales team is selling a product to a customer, so it's a little bit different focus that way from a business standpoint. But at the same time, you're still trying to address the customer problem. So there's similarities there. It's just in a little bit different way. Um, so it depends on with different vendors or companies what their focus is on and kind of their approach in solving the problems. I was also able to work with a lot of vendors and kind of understanding some of the functionality they had, and working with standards organizations, attending HL7 meetings and conferences and things. So um, again, just kind of more problem solving, just a little bit different way. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to fix something or address a need in a vendor environment. So you have to understand their functionality, and then how are you going to apply the product to that situation or that particular need. So I also started working a little bit more with outside the clinical laboratory too, with folks that have needs in the EHR side of things with lab data. So it kind of started this kind of journey kind of outside the laboratory, and I was learning a lot about other aspects of what are the needs for clinicians, what are the needs for other healthcare professionals, and addressing those too.
Follow up on these like two kind of paths here, consulting and product management. If I were to ask you right now, which one's your favorite? Which one would you like more? Not necessarily CAP or your time at
Yeah,
IMO, but like just in general, consulting versus product.
I kind of figured you might ask something like that. So, uh, uh, no, I'd say they both have their advantages, disadvantages, or pluses and minuses. Different teams. I don't know.
No favorite? One over the other? Same?
I don't know. That's really kind of a hard question, because there's some differences in just the different specific clients or people that you're working with. So um, my favorite at CAP was when we worked on the lab interoperability cooperative. That was just, and I think it was just a great group of people from American Hospital Association, CAP, and
Mm.
church groups that all came together, and we tackled each of our areas, but we worked really, really well together. And I think all of us wish it could have gone on much longer than it did, but all good things too have to come to an end at some point.
Mhm. Okay. Well, uh, now that you mentioned, the initiatives that you are working on, there's actually quite a few initiatives that you have been working on and still work on to this day. I think every time I Google your name or Google something with lab, your name comes up somewhere. You gave a presentation or a webinar. I've even found a couple of tweets where people were tweeting about different things that they were saying on your presentation. Super fascinating. But can you, for the next few minutes, share some of the lab informatics initiatives that you have been working on?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it started with the standards and like meaningful use and trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean? So we talked about with the ELR initiatives, but now we're a decade past when that came out. I kind of transitioned a lot into more like the HL7 standards and messaging. There's still a lot of need there for different things. And then I'm also in the Lab Link committee. So that's one thing that I've continued on, and a lot of the challenges and usage to try to help people with that. Um, what's become apparent on a national level, and this is good that the federal folks, is that still getting data out of the EHR, and especially lab data, is still a challenge.
Mm.
I've been on a number of I will say work groups that have popped up. The big one right now is Shield, for the systematic or the harmonization of electronic lab data. And really, it brings together a lot of the key stakeholders. So there's 5 federal agencies like CDC, NLM, ONC, FDA, and CMS or HHS from the CLIA perspective, because the agencies are trying to work on lab data interoperability. And then we have the in vitro diagnostics vendors. So if you think about, I'm just going to use the pandemic as an example because I think everyone's familiar with that, with the test kits. You have like the Abbotts, the Roches, the Siemens. These are global entities that produce lab tests. And I'm just picking on a couple of them. There's many out there. So if I'm just mentioning folks, so they're generating like the test kits or the test platforms, or what most people like FDA like to call devices that go through like FDA approvals and such, or lab developed tests. And then you have the EHR and LIS vendors and lab information systems. That's where the majority of lab data originate. And historically, they were separate from what was the hospital information system that was then transitioned into the computerized patient record or CPR. And now it's like our EHR that we have today. So, and as you know from pharmacy, there's typically been separate pharmacy systems or radiology systems. And they were typically interfaced because you get your best of breed systems, and you'd have these interfaces. And then you have things that are these larger informative reports, because the key of a lab report is to communicate information about the patient to the clinician so they can use it and it's actionable for patient care. So you've had these reports like pathology reports, microbiology reports that have been almost like your PDF text blob reports. And those are not very computer actionable, right? So if you have a PDF, you can maybe attach one terminology code or code system. So how's the computer downstream going to know how to process that or get the information out of that report? I mean, if a clinician can read it, that's fine, but we're trying to make things more computer actionable. So you can use it in clinical decision support or registry reporting or clinical quality measures, whatever your needs are. So Shield is kind of been stood up as this organization. Then you have folks from like reference labs, major labs, and folks in the field, public health, and we're all cross kind of pollinating with some of these challenges. And one of the things from FDA is trying to get information, and I'm going to use the pandemic again, like when they started doing the vaccines and the testing, is there anything that needs to be recalled? Are there any issues that are developing from the testing or the vaccines or whatever? And it's hard to get at some of this data in an interoperable way. So they're working now on, we've kind of shared a lot of the challenges and working on trying to kind of get everything together. And I expect, later there's going to be some things that are going to be evolving from that. I don't know exactly what they are, when or anything like that yet, but we're working on the problems. The problem with lab data, it's complex. There's not one size fits all. So you can kind of tackle a portion of it. I know you've talked about your antimicrobial susceptibilities and things like that. Is everything harmonized? And the other thing too is the terms in the EHR may not be the same terms that are sent from the performing laboratory, because there's this remapping that occurs when the messages come into the EHR. And so are you losing data? Are you transforming data? How does that impact patient safety and meaning? I had a colleague once that was pretty wise in saying you can't tell everything about a lab test by its name alone. There's other data that accompany it. So I'll kind of leave that as a teaser, but there's lots of challenges. And I think about, talking to people like Clem McDonald and some of the pioneers, they've been working on informatics for like all their life.
Yeah.
And it still isn't solved yet, right? So that's good, because there's like career opportunities, and there's so many more opportunities now for people. So you can do on-the-job training versus, formal education programs. These problems we're solving problems, but the new ones are rising. So stay tuned, because, everyone was focused on their own facility, their entity with the data and getting everything stood up, and a meaningful use got the EHRs into physician offices to digitize the data. Now we want to share the data. It's got to be usable data. And what worked maybe sometimes for a single entity, and you start sharing, there might be some more things that need to be addressed.
It's super fascinating. I love the things that you're working on, all the different initiatives. And I think being aware, especially with my audience, just knowing about some of these challenges that you're sharing is very, very helpful. Can we take it even one step further and pick your brain? You have all these different challenges you mentioned that you worked on. Do you have an idea of maybe like one or two kind of things that you would like to see happen, like a potential solution? Like, what do you think would be the biggest one or two solutions? I know it's a very hard question to answer. Is there anything that comes to mind? Like, if you had all the money in the world, what would you invest into to make this not as much of a challenge, specifically lab interoperability?
Oh, that is a challenging, because there's so many different areas.
Yep.
I mean, if you could have like the ideal state or ideal world, ideally it'd be what the clinicians need, and actually not just the clinicians, it's any health professional for what they need in their role. That it's, they have the right information at the right time, in the right format, they know the complete meaning of something, and ultimately so they can deliver safe patient care at a high quality. Because we've all been patients at some point, whether it's just
Mhm.
normal routine, physicals or whatever, or, some people may have had specific chronic health conditions. We've all been there. And I mean, I've been there with family members too, and dealing with some with very complex health issues. And it's very frustrating when you don't have the information you need for patient care, whether you're trying to do it in your role as a health professional, whether you're trying to do it for more of an IT, software, consulting, whatever role you're in, or you're there, with a patient or in their portal or whatever, trying to get the information that you need, whether it's a diagnosis, a prognosis, or treatment, which are kind of the main uses of laboratory data. So I would say I wish, any way we can reduce errors, improve quality and patient safety. I'm not going to say that there's a single answer because, you know, you look at something like Star Trek, or, you think about, where they're projecting things are going to be in the future. Things have evolved a little differently where we're not, transporting people yet, but there's so many things that have arisen. I mean, who would have known about the consumer device market, the fitness market? That has its own challenges too, because you think about you have something like a watch or something. Well, that's not exactly the same as a healthcare
Mhm.
derived data point. So there might be trust issues, like with the home COVID testing. How do you know they didn't swab their dog's ear so they could get their passport to get on a plane? They have a negative COVID test. Well, was it really done on John Doe, your patient? So we're working on some of those issues too. So um, I can't predict the future. Otherwise, we'd probably all be
Sure.
millionaires.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's going to be a lot. It is a hard question, but
Yeah.
I wish lab wasn't so challenging. I'm just kind of the messenger. I'm not the person who creates the problems.
Well, you're certainly helping, solve a lot of these challenges. If it was me and I had a lot of resources at place, just say we should create a clone machine and just clone you. We can solve all these problems at once. But yeah, it's very fascinating. So let's actually start pivoting a little bit to talking about some overarching questions. To kind of wrap up this interview here. The first thing is one of the things that I really enjoy talking about, which is training and education. I always feel that there's never enough about that. And so, my question here for you is what do you think about the current state of informatics training? And you answer that question however you will, but go for it.
Yeah, I think there's many different opportunities. And it really depends too on what fits where people are and what they want to pursue. Some folks might be in the middle of a career and may not be able to take time off to go to like a formal PhD program, and that's totally fine. There's a lot of like programs that have now available that weren't previously. I mentioned some of the AMIA 10 by 10 programs, or
Mhm.
some of the fellowships. I'd say a lot of people too, and if you're especially in a health professional, it might be your clinical setting. So
Mm.
maybe you look at what becoming a super user for your information system, whether it's EHR, pharmacy, radiology, whatever the case may be. It might be taking on more projects on the job. Um, who supports your clinical systems? Can you shadow them or um, get additional on-the-job training? Maybe you work on, the health IT team at your facility. Maybe you're totally not in a healthcare setting and you're something like in pharmacy or like a pharma startup or whatever, bioinformatics. There's so many different angles you can go in. There's so many new opportunities. So I think it's kind of deciding what's the best fit for you and kind of which paths you want to go down, and then looking at the opportunities that area. There's formal education that maybe you just want to do a master's in healthcare informatics. There's programs there too. So I'd say the advantage is there's a lot more training programs because folks globally are recognizing the need for expertise in the area at a variety of levels too.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of the opportunities I've learned about even recently were came from you, and it's super fascinating how many different types of opportunities are out there. So that's um, a great sign that we're headed in the right direction. Okay, let's move on to another question. what do you think has been the most impactful thing that has helped you land a career in informatics and made you successful in your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think just kind of the thirst for learning, continuous learning, but take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you and looking for them, kind of where your interests lie. Some of them have kind of been faculty inviting me or asking or having conversations. Sometimes it's initiating, like at the master class when I said it'd be cool to study, abroad. I mean, if I hadn't really made that kind of off the cuff comment, I wouldn't have maybe not had the opportunity to
No.
to 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 have to study and do that and learn more about what do we need to do to make it real. Um, so I would say I've just, I guess, been blessed to have also doors open and close. So um, I don't know how to describe it. So it's kind of like that hindsight is 2020. When you look back, it's like, okay, this is why I went in this direction and had experience, either education or job in this area. And they're kind of like foundational building blocks. They're building on each other. I don't know, what the future has, but I'm in a university setting now, so I'm learning more about that kind of environment, large employer. But there's also opportunities with leveraging both, things from my previous jobs, and so moving the field forward, moving things forward. It'll be interesting to see where it's going.
Mm.
So I can't say that there's one individual thing. I would say definitely finishing my PhD though and sticking it out, even though it's like I'm more on the longer track, because I kind of took the tangents of studying abroad and other things. It's been probably the most helpful in a way too.
Yeah, I think, it's when I look through your career history, I think one of the most fascinating things is how you've dabbled in a little bit of everything, and it seems you probably have a really good breadth of knowledge and how all these different things work, even like your current position that's a little different than where you've been previously. So it's super fascinating. Which segue to like kind of the opposite kind of question, which is tell me about the most challenging time in your career.
Yeah, that's really good. I would say, looking for that first position when you're coming out of school, and then
Mm,
also, the next position when you're transitioning. Especially, I've gone through two restructuring um,
mm,
opportunities. One, I was kind of like, okay, going through it for the first time and learning more from colleagues and stuff, kind of what to expect, and like, you kind of have this like, okay, what's next? Um, and then the second time, going through it again, I would say one of the challenges being in laboratory informatics specifically is, especially from an HR perspective, informatics is an area too where there's so many different roles, and I'm kind of in these niche environments, kind of looking in laboratory. Most folks in the laboratory, they'll become like a laboratory information system specialist or clinical HIT program, working on their EHR vendor for the lab data. So I'm not quite there because I'm not in the kind of healthcare setting doing that type of informatics. And then there's some that are like, well, you have a PhD, so maybe you want to be in, academia, faculty, teaching, and research.
mm.
And I'm like, well, I'm not quite there either. I mean, so this is kind of where the fit is. And I look at terminology, and then they're like, well, maybe you're a clinical informaticist. Well, there's the board certification in clinical informatics, but that's for physicians. Well, I'm not a physician, so I'm not qualified for that. So I'm not there either. So it's sometimes when you're looking for jobs and what's next. A lot of times, especially, I would say it's more from the peers and connections, especially like on LinkedIn and
Mm,
others. How I got into my current position is I met the physician at the LOINC meeting, and I
mm.
thought it was a long shot. Honestly, I was in between jobs, and lo and behold, here I am. So it really depends. Um, and again, if we're talking about consulting and product manager, maybe you want to go in industry and go that route too. So I would say it's hard because HR doesn't know how to categorize you sometimes.
Mhm.
They don't know how position at one institution might have a different name and a different other position. So if you think you're going to search for you know this term, and do the same thing elsewhere. You may not even find that. You might have to be creative in how you're thinking about even how
Yeah.
informatics is classified, if you will. So I would say that's the most challenging part of it. And then HR too, we talked about different levels. So you might be put into a position and, there's a wide variety when you're going from like, say, medical assistant who's working in informatics to like physician or say, an LPN or a nurse, with something like an associate's degree versus a doctor of nursing practice. So, making sure you have a fit for the education experience that you bring. There's a lot of people who've been in the field and working on the technical side for a long time too. So um, that's kind of challenging. And then once you figure out the positions and experience, and then it's like compensation too. So I know I'm not
Yeah.
a physician, but where does the PhD fit in? In that. So and of course, there's differences between whether you're in industry versus academia or government. So that all factors in too. So it's a good question because
Well, the whole interview series, like I think you helped underpin why I started creating the series is because there's so many different pathways. It's like identifying where you fit or where you don't fit, and just going down these different paths. I think you're a great example of that. I actually relate a lot to that because I feel like I never know where I fit either. But let's ask one that's a little interesting here. If you were to go back in time, to when, let's say, in the very beginning of your career, what would you have wished you had known at that time, knowing what you know now?
I would say probably negotiating your value and the skills you bring to the position, kind of keeping on the
Mm,
HR. Um, because if you're not your own advocate, um, you might have someone on your team or like a boss who can advocate for you. And I've been grateful for those who have been in those roles and kind of navigating different organizational things. But um, it's helpful for you to know your value and what you bring and bringing to a company. And I think too, will also help you um, as you look at where you are in your career and where you want to go and what you want to get out of it. I mean, some folks might be happy like being in the same place for like, their entire career, but as we
mm,
know, there's usually a lot of change
mhm.
in our world today. So it may not be possible for everyone and such, but knowing what you bring, I think is important. And sometimes people don't know that they might need your expertise in different areas. They may not know they have a problem. And so, kind of be able to advocate and show how you can be of value to organizations, I think is good. Um, Sometimes you're kind of like, okay, I have my PhD. It's in informatics. Everyone knows what that means, right? So,
Yeah, and I like that point a lot. It's especially in informatics because one, most people don't know what we do. Even a lot of my own colleagues don't know what we do in pharmacy. But like being able to articulate your value, and advocate for yourself, I think that's a great tip. So, being in laboratory informatics, what do you see as future needs in this space?
yeah, I think there's we've talked about the interoperability aspect. Sorry, can't say that 10 times fast. But yeah, there's going to be local needs, because
Mm,
healthcare is going to be expanding into new areas. So you're always going to need people that are analysts, people that do test setup. I mean, think about pre-COVID. Somebody had to build those tests so they're available, so you could result those tests out and they can be orderable in systems. Interface testing. So as more clinics came up on board with, meaningful use in EHRs, one academic medical center has like 50 different clinic interfaces in their community that they have to have people that are making sure all
mm,
that data is coming across and testing. Um, Really, I think the other thing too is provider needs with laboratory data. I know some of my professional colleagues have shown at our professional meetings that clinicians are getting less education on laboratory data or laboratory. Um, so if you're adding more into medical education, you're emphasizing lab data less, then especially when you get more genomics tests, do they know what they're ordering? What does this mean? How do they interpret results? There's things like diagnostic management teams. that are trying to get laboratory expertise, kind of like pharmacists that round and things like that. So it's there to provide and being seen as a peer on the healthcare team. So that's kind of an area I think we're going to see more people coming out of the laboratory. We also have our
Mm.
CLS, our Doctorate of Clinical Laboratory Science now. And so there are now these graduates that are now getting out into the community in a variety of settings, and they're providing the value from the laboratory there. Um, so that's one area. Uh, Again, a lot of these interoperability aspects, there's going to be a need because you have the diagnostics vendors to, how are we going to leverage lab data in the future? I think we've just scratched the surface on clinical decision support tools, right? There's
Mm.
so much hype about AI, machine learning. I took AI as part of my graduate education. In fact, at IFA, I talked about one of my class projects about classifying anemias based on some laboratory data, just like a
Mm.
little kind of aside class project. But where's AI going in the future? Or that there's so many different applications.
Yeah.
Personalized medicine for genomics, that's a huge untapped area, and with pharmacogenomics too. So there's going to be all these needs, and of course, public health is always going to be an ongoing need. I mean, we don't know what the next
Mm-hmm.
pandemic is going to be. Hopefully, not
Mm-hmm.
anything for a while, but um, there's always going to be public health needs too. The other thing is social determinants of health. That's an
Yeah.
area that's burgeoning, and it kind of touches a little bit on the laboratory when it impacts people getting their labs drawn or being able to get transportation and things like that. There, and I think personal devices is going to be an expanding area, like I said, with consumer testing. So many, many different areas. Not even touch on bioinformatics too. So
Lots of opportunities. I guess this is a good time for people who are interested in informatics. And that's like couldn't have been a better segue because my last question is, for the people who are interested in this day and age, one of the most common questions is about how do you get into informatics? But let's say someone came up to you right now today and asked you, how do I get into informatics? What would be your advice or tip that you have for those individuals?
right, no, that's an excellent question. I think it depends on where you are. What type of interest do you have? I mentioned, you might be a health professional that's already working in a job setting, and you might want to go like more of an on the job or kind of transitioning and taking on more responsibility projects and kind of being a specialist. There's that route, or there's formal education too, or it could be a combination of both. Maybe you do something like a master's that's maybe a year that you can do while you're working, or um, so I think there's really a lot of different ways that you can go with your paths. There's also emergent certifications, like there's this AHIC certification from AMIA now for health professionals. There's clinical informatics boarding and fellowships if you're a physician, if you're down that route. But I'm not a physician, but I've played one, so you know, I don't think that works for the board certification. But just take advantage of all the opportunities that are available to you. I mean, this is one great venue to start learning about it. The programs. There's a lot of online education, whether you can do things like SNOMED or blank training. There's just so many different areas, or even the certifications with your EHR vendor. I haven't gotten any of those, but that's an area that I might want to go into in the future just
Hmm.
to have that under my belt too. So we'll see.
You guys have Epic at your organization.
Yeah, Epic's kind of in our backyard in a way.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Perfect place to get that training.
and
Huh.
it's a cool, interesting campus too. I
Yeah.
mean, I know things kind of shut down with COVID, but you see more buildings going up and with all their unique themes. There's some great online tours too for those who want to do it from the comfort of their couch. But yeah, I've worked with a lot of different vendors. I work with a lot of the lab information system vendors too.
Mm.
Some of them you've heard of, and some of them don't have EHR products. So that's another difference. But yeah, take advantage of whatever training might avail you. It might be even just internal training or online training. There's just so much that you can do, whether it's paid, free, or whatever, to kind of help you, dabble your foot, see if it's your interest area. Maybe it's like, okay, I don't want to be a programmer. No offense to programmers because it's necessary, but but maybe that is what you want to do. Maybe you take a programming language, and I know you had a question about that recently too. Is maybe you want to go work on developing your own SQL queries and programs too. There's so many different avenues. I don't want to like box anybody in because the possibilities are pretty much endless.
Yeah. I mean, again, I guess it goes back to the whole idea. Like there is so many different paths that you can take, and it's a great time to be in informatics because looks like there's a lot of need and challenges that you described. But we are a little over time, which is perfectly good. A lot of great information here. Thanks for sharing all your experiences and lessons learned. Just want to thank everyone for participating and tuning in on this Friday evening. Big thanks to Dr. Pitkus here for spending her Friday evening with us as well. Definitely connect with her. There's a lot of great insights that she shares all the time, especially the training opportunities, which I really like. I know you give a lot of different presentations. I've seen a lot of your COVID ones, so definitely check those out. But yeah, thanks everyone again for your time. Dr. Pitkus, thanks for your time as well. And then we
Thank
will
you.
see everyone next time.
Really appreciate engaging with you and your sessions and your listeners too. That cross collaboration. So it's kind of the hive mind, everyone contributing. So thank you.
Yeah, it's always good. More collaboration.
Laugh. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, I am pun enthusiast. Okay, well, thanks again. We'll see everyone in the next episode. Everyone have a good night.